Welcome back to Farming in Social Distancing. My name is Jonah Bosques. I'm here with Mr. Eric Cassiano. He's one of our extension peers that specifically works in the tropical ornamental fish industry and the whole aquaculture thing that is so interesting to a lot of us. Welcome to our segment. We're excited to have you. As well, I want you to kind of briefly describe what you do and how the Tropical Aquaculture Lab serves Extension and Floridians as a whole.
Excellent. Thank you. So aquaculture in the state of Florida is pretty unique. We have a lot of diversity. Our number one aquaculture product in the state is ornamental fish, tropical fish that go into aquariums. And that's the clientele that I cater to. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Number two is clams. So if you've ever eaten bivalves and clams and oysters, that's our number two product. Most of that's grown out of Cedar Key, but we have other farms throughout the state of Florida. Number three is alligators, interestingly enough. We use the hides for purses and boots and things of that nature, but we also eat the alligator. Number four is aquatic plants, which again is for the ornamental aquaculture industry. Most of the aquatic plants that are grown in the state of Florida are grown for the aquarium trade, to go inside of aquariums. So number five is food fish. And that's really on the increase, starting to grow a lot more tilapia here recently. But that's what we're known for in the aquaculture world is ornamental aquaculture. More than half of our production, our total production, is tropical fish and aquatic plants simply for the ornamental trade. The Tropical Aquaculture Lab, which is in Ruskin, which is where I work, it was founded in 96, started in 96, finally completed in 98, and their sole job is to cater to that number one aquaculture industry, which is the production of ornamental tropical fish for the aquarium trade.
So, by the way, it's a pretty neat place. We've been there several times, and it's always awesome just to see what you guys are doing. So for a small producer, a small farmer, somebody that has several acres of just land that he or she wants to develop into some agricultural business, are some of these options that you described something that would be viable?
Yes, absolutely. Aquaculture is a growing industry, typically for food, but also for other means, bait, sport, and of course, tropical fish as well. It's a little difficult, depends on what sector you want to get into. Some of the species, particularly some of the tropical ornamental species, can be difficult. It takes a little bit of knowledge and know-how and schooling to get to that level. And then on the other end, you have something like tilapia, which is very easy, and that industry is taking off very quickly, simply because there's a high demand for food, and they're not all that tricky. So we tend to get a lot of more aquaculture specialists growing some of these niche, difficult species, and then just sort of common people that want to get into aquaculture. They think it's pretty neat, and then they start growing tilapia. Now, of course, anything you grow, you have to be able to sell. And this tends to be, and I see this. I think we see this in all of agriculture. The person's very good at growing it, not very good at selling it, or the person's very good at selling it, but not very good at growing it. And so, having both of those, having an outlet for your commodity, is definitely advantageous to any business model.
Yeah. So, what would be my first step if I were to go into aquaculture, into a business? If I knocked on your door and I'm starting from scratch, what would be my first step into aquaculture production?
So my suggestion, if you have started from scratch and you have no know-how whatsoever, is to take a workshop or to take a class. There's workshops given by ourselves, but also Auburn and other aquaculture universities throughout the state. And I can help you identify those workshops throughout the United States. That are totally geared towards whatever commodity you want to sell. And that's really the point. And so having a firm grip on what you want to do is going to help immensely. But yeah, getting that hands-on workshop knowledge is going to be integral. to any success?
So for me, I'm a fanatic of livebearer fish, which are the guppies and the mollies and the swordtails and the platies and all those mosquito fish. I want to start selling them. I want to make money off of them because they're pretty easy to propagate. What
Right.
infrastructure do I need for those type of fish?
So Livebearers are they do really well in any sort of capacity, but they're fairly simple to grow in a pond or a big tank. They're not a lot of value, so you're gonna have to grow a lot of them to be able to make up that money that you're going to need to recoup your investment. My first advice to anybody getting into particularly the tropical fish production industry is to identify your wholesalers, if that's the route you want to go, and mostly Livebearers are going to be distributed through a wholesaler, or develop a good online business. But to be able, again, to be able to sell your fish is going to be integral. But Livebearers, they sort of have this continuous production process. So, earthen ponds, which a lot of the tropical fish industry is based on earthen ponds. They're not very big. You're going to see some in the video today.
Okay.
Or actually, you're going to see some while I'm talking. That's another thing that makes ornamental aquaculture a little bit unique compared to catfish or tilapia is you're talking about 300 to 400 different species and varieties of ornamental fish that are being bought and sold. And so a great opportunity to develop a niche, but also you have to be good at what you're doing. So like we sell a lot of African cichlids in the state of Florida, and they're not all that tricky to grow. But if everyone's growing African cichlids, then you tend to drive down the price. And so, and each fish is going to have its own production techniques associated with it. Like you mentioned, Livebearers before. Well, cichlids are mouth brooders, and then you also have egg layers. And so, just identifying the species you want to sell or the group of species that you want to produce, and being able to focus in on that and to get equipment and expertise in that area is going to be advantageous.
So we talked about Livebearers. We talked about market structure a little bit. So I have my plan in place. I want to go contact a wholesaler or some type of marketing structure. How can I start that? How can I start making those relationships? How can I make it a successful business from there on?
So, and this happens a lot. First of all, let's back up. And I forgot to mention this. Whenever you're developing your aquaculture business, the state of Florida has a great agency. The Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services has its own division of aquaculture. And those representatives are there to help you navigate the regulations that are associated with aquaculture. So in other states, you may have to go to 3 or 4 different regulatory agencies to figure out if what you're doing is legal. But we have the Division of Aquaculture, FDAC's Division of Aquaculture. So once you start, you need to make friends with them, and they're a great group of people, and they'll help you navigate the regulatory side of it. As far as what to sell, that's the common theme, and I see it all the time. Young kid out of high school or college started a farm because he wanted to grow whatever, the monkey fish, which is not a real fish, by the way, but wanted to grow that fish, and then realized no one wants to buy it. So I told him, go to your wholesaler. Literally, it's a phone call or it's a trip in person. Ask them what they need, and they will tell you what fish they will buy from you. And that's probably the best course of action. Now, obviously, if you want to go online, and this is a kind of a newer movement. Some of the farmers in the past have done this and done quite well. Mm-hmm. And a lot more, of course, now are forced to explore these online outlets. And I suggest doing that. If you're able to sell your fish online, or if you're able to sell a more expensive fish at less volume online, you're going to be able to make money that way. Now, I don't suggest doing Livebearers unless you got something unique there. Yeah. But definitely some of the cichlids can go for 15, 20, if not more dollars per fish, and that's actually pretty good for an online business. So. And then also too, the saltwater side of fish. We haven't mentioned saltwater too much. I would say out of all the tropical fish that are grown in the state of Florida, about 90% of them are freshwater and 10% are saltwater, which is not very much, but that's growing quite fast. And the value per unit fish for a saltwater fish is much greater. And so, again, you're not having to sell as many fish to recoup that investment.
But is that more difficult than freshwater in terms of water quality and all that stuff?
Yeah, and we're going to see some of these components. You know, when you do saltwater, you're definitely going to have to do recirculating aquaculture systems, which are not more difficult, but it's just it's apples and oranges. It's just a different level of technicality that you're going to have to learn, and ways to maintain these systems. It's not what we call an extensive system, which is a pond or something that's, you know, in the natural environment, quote unquote, but it's outside. And so, yeah, to grow saltwater is a little trickier. I hesitate to say difficult, simply because I think it's more of an aspect of we just haven't been doing it as much as we have freshwater. I mean, we've been growing freshwater fish since the 1930s, if not before. And saltwater fish is just pretty recently, you know, 70s, 80s. And so we didn't know a lot about how to grow clownfish in the beginning, and now we know a lot about how to grow clownfish.
Yeah. So water quality, what I got my fish growing, what am I looking for in terms of water quality? Because we've had this conversation before. Water quality is going to be it's paramount. So what are those practices that are, you know, a must in you know, starting an aquaculture business?
Wow, that's fantastic. I actually just wrote an article for the Southern Regional Aquaculture Center on treatment of water before use in an aquaculture facility. And I'll try not to get too much detail.
We can read it later.
Yeah, there you go. Some parameters certain fish are going to do better in. Some parameters you have to adjust, like say your alkalinity or hardness needs to be, you need softer water during breeding than you would any normal production time. So some fish are picky like that, but other parameters like CO2 and hydrogen sulfide and ammonia, they need to be reduced, if not eliminated completely, before you put your fish in there, because that could be detrimental to their health. And so there's really a whole list of water quality parameters, probably too in depth to go into detail here, but definitely want to, 9 times out of 10, if there's a health issue associated with your fish production, it's probably, like I said, 9 times out of 10 going to be water quality.
Okay, so now that we've talked about, what the people out there need to do to start producing ornamental fish, there's a whole lot more that we can cover here. Briefly, I want you to promote your service through the Tropical Aquaculture Lab in diagnosis and all that good stuff that you guys are doing for us.
Fantastic. So here at the Tropical Aquaculture Lab, we cater to the ornamental fish production industry, but that's not exclusive. We also do a little bit of research and a little bit of diagnostic lab services for sport and game fish and food fish and things of that nature. We're basically split into maybe 3 or 4 different categories. We have Dr. Jeff Hill and Dr. Quentin Tuckett that explore non-native species, because most of the fish that are grown within the tropical ornamental industry are not from around here. A lot of them are from Southeast Asia, South America, and Africa. And we want to obviously prevent escapement and understand what would happen, develop risk, and what would happen if these fish were to get out into the wild. So that service is really integral to developing what's called risk analysis for a lot of these species that we work with, and trying to make sure that risk is low. We have Dr. Matt DiMaggio, who does really just general fish production techniques, and that can be mostly reproduction for freshwater and saltwater fish, but also anywhere from diet to growth metrics, and also pesticide labeling and things of that nature. Just anything that's going to help the farm and the farmer. Mm-hmm. Dr. Roy Yanung, he heads up the Aquatic Animal Health Service here at the Tropical Aquaculture Lab. And him and Debbie Pooter, they run the diagnostic laboratory. And that's really the service that the lab was founded around. And what that is essentially, and I hate to say it, I'm sure I'll I'll get razzed for it, but it's a fish hospital. And so basically, if a farmer has a population of sick fish, then a sample of those sick fish can be brought to the lab, and they can diagnose what's wrong with the population, and prescribe a treatment. And it's really just for a nominal fee, and to recoup the losses of material. That's really the integral service that the lab provides. And really, I like to describe it as that started the lab, and then the rest of the lab was sort of built around that service. And then we just have general farm production, which Craig and Micah sort of head up. Craig Watson's our director, and Micah Allo is our farm manager. And then, of course, staff is always looking at things like efficient energy use on the farm. We had a project with FDAC's Office of Energy, where we were looking at not just alternative sources of energy, but ways to reduce cost on a farm. Simply, how much energy can you save by changing your bulb to an LED bulb, or using a sweep instead of a hard 90 in your water plumbing? So it's things like that which are really important for the farmer. They want to know how much can they save. And then, of course, outreach, which is what we all do. We are an extension lab, but that's what I do here at the lab as well. And number one clientele, of course, is farmers, but we also do a lot of work with schools. Schools are developing aquaculture programs, mostly through their agricultural education, but sometimes science classes as well. And then, of course, just general public, and reaching out to general public and make sure they know what aquaculture is and what it isn't.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Eric Cassiano, thank you so much for your time. Just remember that we have an extension educator, an extension agent, an extension office in every one of Florida's counties. If you have any other questions regarding aquaculture, ornamental aquaculture, if you're in 4-H and you want to start an aquaculture project, you can reach out to Extension. We are there to help you and provide solutions for you. Eric, I'm gonna share your email with people if that's okay with you, so they can contact you with any questions that they have. And anyway, just thank you for your time, and I hope this video is educational enough that it can get you started in the right direction. Have a good day.
Excellent. Thank you.